The morning air outside the Jefferson County Courthouse was cool and sharp, carrying the low murmur of traffic and the steady rhythm of footsteps climbing the wide granite stairs. Lawyers adjusted briefcases. Defendants spoke in hushed tones. Court officers stood near the entrance, scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. Officer Daniel Harper stood just inside the security checkpoint, posture rigid, uniform crisp, badge polished to a mirror shine. He had worked courthouse detail for nearly 6 years. In that time, he had learned one thing above all else: control the room before it controls you. He noticed the man immediately. Tall, well-dressed, calm. The man stood near a side hallway that led toward administrative offices, an area not typically accessed by the public without escort. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, no visible anxiety, hands loosely clasped in front of him as if waiting. Harper's instincts sharpened. He stepped forward, boots echoing against the marble floor. "Sir," Harper called out, voice firm but not yet aggressive. "That hallway is restricted. What are you doing there?" The man turned slowly, meeting Harper's gaze without hesitation. His expression was composed, almost thoughtful. "Good morning," he replied evenly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." The response wasn't hostile, but it wasn't submissive either. Harper's jaw tightened slightly. "That's not an answer. Do you have authorization to be beyond this point?" "I do." "From whom?" The man paused for half a second, then said calmly, "From the courthouse." It was the kind of answer that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Harper chose the one that challenged him. "I'm going to need identification," Harper said, extending his hand. The man studied him briefly. "Is there a specific reason for the request?" Harper felt the shift instantly. The tone wasn't confrontational. It was precise, controlled, like someone accustomed to asking questions rather than answering them. "You're standing in a restricted area," Harper replied. "That's reason enough." "I'm not beyond the posted boundary," the man said, gesturing subtly to a small brass line embedded in the floor tiles. "And there's no signage indicating restriction on this side." Harper glanced down quickly. The line was there, but he had enforced that hallway informally for years. "That area is generally off-limits without escort," Harper insisted. "Generally," the man repeated quietly. "Not officially." A few nearby staff members slowed their pace, sensing tension. Harper felt the subtle weight of observation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice but sharpening it. "Sir, I'm not going to argue policy on the floor. ID." The man didn't move immediately. Instead, he asked one more question. "Officer, are you detaining me?" The words landed differently than expected. Harper straightened. "If you don't comply, I can." The man nodded once. No visible fear, no raised voice. "Understood," he said calmly. "Then please proceed clearly." Something about the phrasing unsettled Harper. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't resistance. It was documentation, verbal, precise. Harper made a decision. "Step aside," he ordered. "We're going to clarify this." The murmurs in the hallway grew faintly louder. Court clerks exchanged glances. A bailiff paused near a doorway but said nothing. The man allowed himself to be guided a few steps away from the flow of foot traffic. He did not resist. He did not protest. He simply watched. And as Officer Daniel Harper placed a firm hand near the man's elbow, asserting control in front of the courthouse crowd, he believed he was preventing disorder before it began. What he didn't realize was that this moment, this small assertion of dominance, was the first crack in a structure he didn't even know existed. And the man he had just stopped was not where he appeared to be by accident. The tension in the hallway thickened as Officer Daniel Harper guided the suited man away from the main corridor. Conversations around them quieted, replaced with the subtle hum of curiosity. Courthouse staff were trained not to interfere with security matters, but they were not immune to noticing when something felt unusual. "Name," Harper demanded, positioning himself squarely in front of the man. The man met his eyes steadily. "Marcus Ellison." "Identification." Marcus reached slowly into the inner pocket of his jacket. His movements were deliberate, careful, almost as if he were ensuring there would be no misunderstanding. He produced a slim leather wallet, but did not immediately open it. "Before I hand this over," Marcus said calmly, "am I being formally detained?" Harper exhaled sharply through his nose. "You're being questioned." That wasn't my question. The precision of Marcus's tone irritated him. Harper felt eyes on his back clerks, a junior prosecutor, even a couple of defendants waiting for their hearings. The last thing he wanted was to appear uncertain. Yes, Harper said finally. You are being detained pending clarification of your authorization. Marcus nodded once and handed over the wallet. Harper flipped it open. Driver's license, clean record, local address. Nothing unusual. Yet something about the man's composure felt like a challenge. No nervous shifting, no rushed explanations, just stillness. What's your purpose in this building? Harper asked. Work. What kind of work? Administrative. Harper closed the wallet and handed it back. You don't look like staff. Marcus allowed the faintest hint of a smile. I wasn't aware there was a required appearance. That was enough. Harper stepped back and made his decision. You're coming with me. A few audible murmurs rippled through the hallway. On what charge? Marcus asked quietly. Obstruction, Harper replied, and failure to comply with a lawful directive. I complied, Marcus stated evenly. You challenged it. The words hung in the air. Harper reached for his radio. Dispatch. I have one detained for obstruction inside the main corridor, escorting to holding. There was a pause on the other end. Then a simple acknowledgement. A bailiff approached cautiously. Everything all right, officer? Handled, Harper said firmly. Marcus turned his head slightly toward the bailiff, not pleading, not accusing, just observing. As Harper began escorting him down the hallway, Marcus spoke again, his voice low enough that only Harper could hear. Are you certain about this? The question wasn't threatening. It wasn't sarcastic. It was calm, and that calmness unsettled Harper more than resistance would have. Yes, Harper replied stiffly. I am. They passed through a set of secured doors toward a temporary holding office used for minor courthouse violations. Staff stepped aside as they walked by. Some looked confused. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Inside the small office, Harper gestured toward a chair. Sit. Marcus complied without hesitation. Harper began filling out a preliminary incident form, pressing harder on the pen than necessary. Charge: obstruction of courthouse operations. Supplement: non-compliant behavior in restricted zone. Across the desk, Marcus folded his hands loosely in his lap. You understand, Marcus said calmly, that documentation must align with fact. Harper didn't look up. It will, he replied. Marcus leaned back slightly, posture relaxed despite the circumstances. I hope so. Harper finished the form and stood. You'll have your opportunity to explain yourself in court this afternoon. Marcus nodded. I look forward to it. As Harper stepped out of the room to finalize the filing, he felt a sense of control restored. The situation was contained, authority asserted, order maintained. But outside the holding room, two courthouse clerks exchanged uneasy glances. And somewhere deeper within the building's administrative wing, a notification had already been triggered quietly, automatically. The public arrest had been made. What Harper didn't yet understand was that the trial ahead would not unfold the way he expected. Officer Daniel Harper sat alone in the small administrative office adjacent to holding, the door half closed, fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow across his desk. The courthouse noise hummed faintly beyond the wall's distant footsteps, muffled voices, the rhythm of a building functioning as it always had. In front of him lay the official incident report form. He began writing carefully. Subject observed, lingering in restricted corridor, displayed evasive responses when questioned, challenged lawful authority during compliance request. He paused. The words looked strong, justified. He continued, behavior consistent with obstruction of courthouse operations. Harper leaned back in his chair, reviewing the phrasing. In his mind, he wasn't exaggerating. He was interpreting. Experience had taught him that challenges to authority often started subtly. Tone, posture, questions that sounded innocent but carried defiance underneath. Marcus Ellison had questioned him. Calmly, publicly, and that mattered. Harper adjusted one sentence slightly. Subject's refusal to provide immediate identification created delay and disruption in corridor flow. Technically, the delay had been minimal, but in Harper's mind, potential disruption was still disruption. He signed his name at the bottom. Across the hall, Marcus sat quietly in the holding room, jacket removed but still neatly folded beside him. He showed no outward frustration, no pacing, no visible anger. Instead, he asked the bailiff who had briefly checked on him, "May I make a phone call?" The bailiff hesitated. "You've been charged with a minor obstruction. Standard procedure allows it." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." The call was brief. "Yes," Marcus said calmly into the receiver. "It's begun. Pause. No, don't intervene yet." Another pause. "I'd prefer this unfold properly." He hung up. Back in the office, Harper forwarded the completed report to the internal courthouse system. Once filed, it entered the official record. Once recorded, it carried weight. He felt a subtle satisfaction. Procedure had been followed. Control maintained. A knock sounded lightly at his door. It was Deputy Collins, a younger officer assigned to courtroom rotation. "You really charging him?" Collins asked quietly. "Yes. For what exactly?" "Obstruction," Harper replied. "He was testing boundaries." Collins shifted slightly. "He didn't seem aggressive." Harper's jaw tightened. "Aggression isn't always loud. Sometimes it's calculated." Collins nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered in his expression. "Trial's set for this afternoon." "Good," Harper said. "Let the judge hear it." After Collins left, Harper stood and adjusted his uniform in the reflection of a glass cabinet. He looked composed, authoritative, confident. He believed firmly that courtroom security depended on officers drawing clear lines. If someone stood near restricted areas and questioned authority, that line had to be reinforced immediately. Otherwise, control eroded. He checked the system once more. The charge was officially logged. Obstruction of courthouse operations. Defendant: Marcus Ellison. Harper didn't recognize the name. If he had taken one more second to search the internal directory instead of closing the file, he might have noticed something unusual. But he didn't. He walked back toward the main corridor, posture steady, unaware that the brief phone call Marcus had made had already activated quiet attention in another wing of the building. And as the clock moved closer to the afternoon session, Harper felt only one thing: confidence. The kind that comes when a person believes the badge on their chest guarantees they are right. He had no idea that within a few hours, that certainty would be tested in open court. By early afternoon, courtroom 3 was nearly full. The polished wooden benches creaked softly as observers settled in, lawyers waiting for later hearings, defendants scheduled after the current docket, clerks moving in and out with quiet efficiency. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, stretching pale lines across the floor. Officer Daniel Harper stood near the prosecution table, uniform pressed, posture firm. His report folder rested neatly in front of him. He had testified dozens of times before. Minor charges like obstruction were routine. Straightforward, controlled. At the defense table sat Marcus Ellison. No attorney beside him, no visible anxiety. His jacket was back on, perfectly aligned. His hands rested calmly on the table, fingers loosely interlaced. He glanced briefly around the courtroom, not nervously, but observantly, as if taking mental notes. The judge entered. "All rise." The room stood, then settled. "Case 2-1-4-7-B, the clerk announced. State versus Marcus Ellison. Charge: obstruction of courthouse operations." The judge adjusted her glasses and looked toward Harper. "Officer, you may present the basis for detention." Harper stepped forward confidently. At approximately 9:17 a.m., I observed the defendant positioned in a restricted corridor adjacent to administrative offices. When approached and instructed to provide identification and state purpose, he responded evasively and challenged my lawful authority. His actions caused disruption in the flow of courthouse operations, requiring detainment. His voice was steady, clear, professional. The judge nodded. "Did the defendant refuse identification?" "He delayed compliance," Harper replied, and questioned my directive in a manner consistent with obstruction. Marcus listened without interruption. The prosecutor added lightly, "The state contends the officer acted within his authority to maintain security." The judge turned toward Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, you are representing yourself?" "I am," Marcus said calmly. "Do you contest the officer's statement?" Marcus paused, then spoke evenly. "I do." The courtroom quieted slightly. In what manner? The judge asked. I complied with every direct order, Marcus replied. I requested clarification regarding the nature of detention. I did not refuse identification. I did not obstruct traffic. I did not raise my voice. Harper resisted the urge to interrupt. The judge looked back at him. Officer, was there physical resistance? No. Verbal threats? No. Interference with another case? No, Your Honor. But, the judge pressed. His tone and manner indicated challenge to authority. A faint murmur drifted from the back benches before quickly dying down. The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully. Challenge to authority is not inherently obstruction, officer. Harper stiffened slightly. It can escalate if unchecked. Marcus spoke again, carefully measured. Your Honor, I would like to request the officer's body camera footage from the interaction. Harper felt a flicker of irritation. It was a minor charge. Body cam review for something this small felt unnecessary. The prosecutor hesitated. That may delay proceedings. Marcus remained composed. Accuracy should not be rushed. The judge nodded slowly. The request is reasonable. Harper's confidence didn't vanish, but it shifted. This was no longer procedural routine. The clerk began processing the footage request. As the courtroom adjusted for the brief delay, Harper glanced toward Marcus. Marcus met his gaze. There was no smirk, no triumph, only calm. And for the first time that day, Harper felt something unfamiliar beneath his certainty. Uncertainty. Because trials were predictable when defendants panicked. They were far less predictable when defendants remained completely still. The courtroom remained settled but tense as the clerk worked to retrieve the requested body camera footage. A low mechanical hum filled the silence, while files were transferred onto the courtroom display system. Officer Daniel Harper stood near the witness stand, arms folded behind his back, maintaining his composure. He reminded himself this was routine. Footage would confirm his authority. It always did. At the defense table, Marcus Ellison reviewed a small notepad he had brought with him. He wasn't writing, just scanning lines already written. His expression remained neutral, almost patient. The judge glanced toward him. Mr. Ellison, while we wait, do you wish to question the officer? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied calmly. He stood, buttoning his jacket slowly, then stepped forward just enough to address Harper directly. Officer Harper, he began evenly. When you first approached me this morning, did I move beyond any posted restricted boundary? Harper answered without hesitation. You were positioned adjacent to one. That wasn't my question, Marcus replied, voice still polite. Did I cross a posted boundary? Harper paused. No. A subtle shift rippled through the room. Marcus continued. Was there signage clearly marking that specific tile line as restricted? No official sign, Harper admitted. But it is commonly understood. Commonly understood by whom? Marcus asked. Harper's jaw tightened slightly. By courthouse personnel. Am I courthouse personnel? Marcus asked. The question lingered. You did not identify yourself as such, Harper replied. You did not ask whether I was, Marcus responded calmly. The judge leaned back slightly, observing the exchange carefully. Marcus continued. Did I refuse to provide identification? You delayed. For how long? Harper searched his memory. Several seconds. Less than 10, Marcus pressed. Approximately. Marcus nodded once. And during those seconds, did I make any threatening gestures? No. Raise my voice? No. Use profanity? No. Marcus turned briefly toward the judge. Your Honor, I would also like to request access to the courthouse policy manual regarding restricted corridors. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Relevance? Marcus answered before the judge could. The officer referenced informal enforcement. I would like clarification whether policy defines informal assumption as enforceable restriction. The judge nodded. Clerk, retrieve the administrative corridor policy. Harper felt the first true crack in his confidence. This wasn't emotional defense. It wasn't anger. It was procedural precision. Marcus returned his attention to Harper. Officer, when I asked if I was being detained, why did that question contribute to your decision to escalate? It indicated non-compliance, Harper replied. Or, Marcus said gently, it indicated awareness of rights. Silence filled the space between them. The clerk announced, Body cam footage ready. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the monitor activated. Harper felt a tightening in his chest, not fear exactly, but awareness. Footage never captured interpretation, only reality. The video began playing. There he was on screen, approaching Marcus in the hallway. The voice recording was clear. Harper listened as the exchange replayed. Calm responses, measured tone, no visible agitation from the defendant. Marcus's question echoed from the speakers. "Officer, are you detaining me?" In the courtroom, the same calm voice sat only a few feet away. The video continued. No raised voice, no obstruction, no aggressive movement. The clip ended. The room remained quiet. Harper kept his posture straight, but something inside him had shifted, because what he had described as resistance looked different when projected onto a screen. And Marcus Ellison still hadn't raised his voice. Not once. The lights in the courtroom brightened again as the body cam footage ended. A quiet stillness settled over the room, not dramatic, not explosive, but heavy. The kind of silence that follows clarity. Officer Daniel Harper remained standing near the witness stand, posture still disciplined. But the confidence that had once anchored him now felt less stable. On the screen, the interaction had appeared controlled, almost routine. There was no visible hostility from Marcus Ellison, no raised voice, no physical obstruction. Just questions. The judge folded her hands thoughtfully. "Officer Harper," she said evenly, "the footage does not reflect aggression. It reflects inquiry." Harper cleared his throat. "Respectfully, Your Honor, inquiry can become obstruction when it challenges lawful instruction." Marcus remained seated, listening without expression. The court clerk, a woman in her early 40s named Linda Carver, shifted slightly at her desk. She had been unusually quiet throughout the proceedings. Now, as she reviewed something on her monitor, her posture changed subtle, but noticeable. She glanced once toward Marcus, then quickly back at her screen. Marcus stood again. "Your Honor, may I request the official administrative definition of restricted corridor as outlined in Courthouse Operations Code?" The prosecutor exhaled slowly. "This is becoming unnecessarily procedural." Marcus turned toward him politely. "Accuracy is procedural." The judge nodded. "Clerk?" Linda hesitated for half a second before speaking. "Yes, Your Honor." She accessed the internal system. Her fingers moved more carefully than usual. Harper watched her. Something in her demeanor felt different, more formal. According to Courthouse Administrative Code Section 3.2, Linda read, "A corridor is considered restricted only when clearly marked by posted signage or secured by keycard access. Informal designation is not enforceable." A faint murmur moved through the gallery. Harper felt heat rise slightly at the back of his neck. Marcus spoke again, tone steady. "Thank you." He turned back toward Harper. "Officer, was the corridor secured by keycard?" "No." "Was there signage?" "No." Marcus nodded once more. Across the room, the bailiff who had earlier assisted Harper shifted his stance. He had stood casually before. Now his posture straightened, less aligned with Harper, more attentive to Marcus. The shift was subtle, but Harper noticed it. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Officer Harper, your report referenced obstruction in a restricted zone. Based on policy, that designation appears inaccurate." Harper swallowed. "It is commonly understood among staff. Common understanding does not replace written code." The judge interrupted gently but firmly. Marcus glanced briefly toward the clerk again. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Recognition flickered there. Respect. Harper caught it this time, and for the first time, a question formed in his mind. Why did the clerk look at Marcus that way? Marcus returned to his seat without triumph, without satisfaction. He simply folded his hands again. The prosecutor leaned toward Harper and whispered something too low to hear. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Ellison," she said carefully, "is there any additional information you wish to present before we proceed further?" Marcus paused. There was no rush in his movements. "Yes, Your Honor," he said finally. "I would like the court to review internal administrative authority records regarding oversight jurisdiction inside this building." The request seemed oddly specific. The prosecutor frowned. "Oversight jurisdiction?" Marcus nodded calmly. Yes. The judge looked toward the clerk. Can that be accessed? Linda hesitated only briefly. It can. Harper felt a tightening in his chest that he could no longer ignore. Something was unfolding beneath the surface. Something procedural. And he had the distinct feeling he was no longer the one directing it. The subtle signals were no longer subtle. They were forming a pattern, and Harper was just beginning to see it. The courtroom air had shifted, though no one had made an overt announcement. It was subtle, the faint scrape of a chair, a longer-than-usual pause before a question, the way the bailiffs now stood at attention rather than casually. Harper sensed it immediately. Something was changing. He had approached the day expecting a routine hearing, a minor charge, a little disruption, and a quick resolution. But Marcus Ellison was not routine. His questions had been precise, measured, and entirely procedural. Every answer from Harper's side had been dissected calmly, exposing inconsistencies he had not intended to reveal. "Officer Harper," the judge said, tapping her pen lightly on the desk, "the report you submitted contains several statements that appear inconsistent with the body cam footage. Can you explain the discrepancies?" Harper's jaw tightened. He was used to facing skeptical judges, yes, but never one who methodically dissected every word while maintaining perfect neutrality. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my report reflects the sequence of events as I perceived them in real time. It is possible that nuances in tone or gesture are not captured fully by video." Marcus remained seated, still and composed, his gaze steady on Harper. "Your Honor," he said, "the video footage shows no obstruction, no delay of significance, and no aggressive behavior. Officer Harper's interpretation of my actions appears subjective rather than factual." The courtroom murmured quietly. The gallery, which had been silent, leaned forward. Even the bailiff adjusted his stance, listening intently. Harper's overconfidence, built over years of assuming procedural compliance, felt shaky. The judge nodded slowly. "We will consider that. Mr. Ellison, do you hold any official position within this courthouse?" Harper stiffened slightly, expecting a defensive or evasive response. But Marcus answered calmly, "Yes, Your Honor. I am the Chief Court Administrator, responsible for overseeing internal operations and compliance procedures across this facility." A brief pause fell over the courtroom. Spectators shifted in their seats. The bailiff stiffened. Harper's confident posture faltered for the first time that day. He had not anticipated the man he had detained so publicly to hold such authority. The clerk, Linda, exchanged a subtle glance with Marcus before quickly returning to her notes. She had known, perhaps, all along who he was, but remained silent until now. The recognition had been brief, respectful, and unspoken. The judge continued, her tone even but firm. "Officer Harper, are you aware that internal oversight falls directly under Mr. Ellison's authority? Your interpretation of his actions as obstructive may have been premature." Harper swallowed hard, his voice caught slightly, betraying the tension he usually masked perfectly. "Your Honor, Marcus held up a hand, calmly, authoritatively. "Officer Harper, I do not seek confrontation. I only request accuracy in documentation and adherence to proper procedure. That is all." Harper felt the first real crack in his professional confidence. His authority, previously unquestioned, now sat exposed before the judge, the court staff, and the gallery. Every carefully phrased sentence of his report was suddenly vulnerable. Every assumption he had made about the man he detained was now being examined. And the quiet, deliberate composure of Marcus Ellison made the courtroom aware, in a way Harper could not counter, that control had quietly shifted. For Harper, the first crack had become undeniable. The courtroom seemed to pause, as if time itself had slowed. The previous tension now settled into a heavy stillness, a quiet anticipation that filled every corner of the room. Officer Daniel Harper's shoulders tensed as he realized that the balance of authority had begun to tilt, but he had no idea just how far it would shift. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Marcus Ellison. "Mr. Ellison, it has come to the court's attention that you hold a position of significant authority within this courthouse. Would you care to clarify your role for the record?" Marcus rose from his seat. Every movement was deliberate, precise, and calm. There was no flourish, no grand gesture. yet the entire room seemed to lean in, drawn by the quiet gravity of the moment. "I am the Chief Court Administrator for Jefferson County Courthouse," Marcus said clearly. "My responsibilities include overseeing courthouse operations, internal compliance, staff supervision, and ensuring that procedural rules are consistently applied." The name carried weight. The gallery stirred with soft whispers. Harper felt a heat rise in his chest, a tightening that no amount of professional training could suppress. He had assumed control, believed he was enforcing routine security measures, but he hadn't recognized the authority of the man standing calmly before him. The judge's tone remained neutral, but carried undeniable emphasis. "Officer Harper, do you understand the position Mr. Ellison holds within this institution?" Harper nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had held all morning. Marcus continued, addressing the court without haste. "I did not resist instructions. I complied with procedural requests. My interaction with Officer Harper was calm, measured, and fully consistent with courthouse regulations. Any perception otherwise appears to be based on subjective interpretation rather than fact." The clerk, Linda Carver, shifted subtly at her desk. Her eyes met Marcus's briefly, a nod of recognition, quiet acknowledgement of his authority before returning to her work. The bailiffs straightened. Prosecutors and spectators alike now processed the revelation, their expressions mixing surprise, respect, and a dawning understanding of the situation's gravity. Harper's posture stiffened further. He realized in that instant that his carefully constructed narrative, the report he had filed with such confidence, was now under scrutiny not only for accuracy, but for assumption. Every word, every judgment he had recorded, was vulnerable. The judge's gavel tapped lightly, regaining attention. "The court acknowledges Mr. Ellison's role and authority. Officer Harper, any further statements regarding the defendant's conduct must take this into account." Harper's voice was steady, but only outwardly. Inside, his confidence wavered. The man he had detained so publicly, so assuredly, was not only innocent of obstruction but held institutional authority far greater than his own. Marcus returned to his seat with the same calmness that had defined him from the beginning. There was no smirk, no triumph, just control, quiet and absolute, that spoke louder than any words. For the first time, the courtroom witnessed the complete reversal. Authority once assumed, unchecked and loud, now humbled by composed, procedural knowledge. Harper was no longer the one in charge. The reveal was complete, and in that quiet, measured authority, Marcus Ellison commanded far more attention than any badge ever could. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed completely. What had begun as a routine hearing, a minor charge of obstruction against a seemingly ordinary courthouse visitor, had evolved into a tense examination of authority itself. Officer Daniel Harper stood frozen near the witness stand, his previous confidence eroded by the revelations that had unfolded. Marcus Ellison, seated calmly at the defense table, projected an unshakable presence. His earlier questions had been precise, calculated, and entirely procedural, but now the full weight of his authority was clear to everyone in the room. As Chief Court Administrator, he oversaw not only administrative operations, but also compliance and internal conduct. Harper realized, perhaps too late, that he had publicly detained someone whose reach extended far beyond his own. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Officer Harper, it has been established that Mr. Ellison holds internal oversight authority over courthouse operations. Are you aware that your actions may have exceeded the limits of your procedural authority?" Harper swallowed hard. "Your Honor, my intent was to enforce security and ensure compliance." The words sounded hollow even to him. Marcus's calm gaze met his. There was no anger, no ridicule, only controlled observation, like a teacher silently assessing a student who had miscalculated a lesson. From the gallery, courthouse clerks exchanged subtle nods. The bailiffs shifted to a more formal stance. Even the prosecutor leaned back slightly, reconsidering the strength of the state's position. Harper could feel their judgment pressing on him. The silence was oppressive. Marcus spoke, tone steady and measured. "Your Honor, at no point did I resist lawful instruction. I complied fully with procedural requests. Officer Harper's interpretation of my actions as obstructive is based on assumption rather than fact. Furthermore, my administrative authority grants me oversight in situations involving internal security and procedural enforcement. Any deviation from policy must be corrected to maintain institutional integrity. The judge nodded thoughtfully. This court takes internal compliance seriously. Officer Harper, your report and testimony must be considered in light of Mr. Ellison's position and the documented procedures of this courthouse. Harper's mind raced. Every line in his report, every note he had written that painted Marcus as defiant, now appeared exaggerated and subjective. His authority had been publicly questioned. His judgment, assumed correct for years, was now scrutinized under an unyielding lens. The gallery murmured softly. Observers began whispering among themselves, noting the dramatic reversal. Marcus did not celebrate. He did not gloat. He simply sat with quiet composure, exuding a calm authority that filled the courtroom without raising a single voice. Harper tried to regain control, offering explanations, clarifying procedural steps, but each response only highlighted the gap between his perceived authority and Marcus's actual power. The shift was undeniable. The public arrest, the earlier detention, even Harper's confident demeanor, all of it now looked misplaced. The judge leaned forward. It is clear that Mr. Ellison's authority in this building supersedes any temporary enforcement measures taken by individual officers. Officer Harper, this court will ensure that the application of security protocol aligns with official policy. For Harper, the realization was complete. Authority, once wielded with certainty, had been quietly reversed by a man who never raised his voice, never lost his composure, and never acted outside procedure. In that moment, the courtroom understood a fundamental truth. Control is not about force or bravado. It is about knowledge, position, and calm execution. Harper's badge could command presence, but Marcus Ellison's authority commanded respect. The reversal was no longer subtle. It was absolute. Officer Daniel Harper's confidence, once solid as the courthouse's stone pillars, now felt fragile, crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. Every step he had taken that morning, the stop, the detention, the filing of his report, was suddenly exposed as misjudged, premature, and misinformed. The gallery's soft murmurs and the clerk's discreet glances compounded the collapse of his authority. The judge, her expression calm yet firm, addressed Harper. Officer Harper, based on today's proceedings and the body cam evidence, it appears that your assessment of Mr. Ellison's actions did not accurately reflect procedural compliance. How do you respond? Harper inhaled sharply. Your Honor, His voice wavered slightly, a subtle betrayal of the certainty he had carried all morning. He cleared his throat and tried again. I was enforcing what I believed to be standard security protocol. I did not intend any wrongdoing. The judge's eyes did not soften. Intent does not replace accuracy, officer. Authority is measured by adherence to law and procedure, not perception or assumption. The courtroom remained silent. The tension like a tangible thread stretched taut across the benches and floors. Harper shifted, trying to regain composure, but each movement felt heavier, more calculated under Marcus Ellison's watchful gaze. Marcus did not celebrate or assert dominance. He simply observed. His calmness amplified Harper's discomfort, turning what should have been routine into an examination of both judgment and professionalism. Even the prosecutor seemed cautious now, reviewing the officer's report and reconsidering each statement. Internal contradictions, which Harper had overlooked in the rush to assert control, now glared starkly against the evidence provided by the body cam. Each discrepancy chipped away at the credibility Harper had relied upon for years. The bailiff, who had once treated Harper with unspoken support, now stood neutral, respectful of the courtroom hierarchy and Marcus's position. The subtle shift in alignment was unmistakable to Harper, though he tried to ignore it, clinging to the authority of his uniform. Marcus finally spoke, tone measured, calm, and deliberate. Your Honor, I want to clarify that at no point did I resist compliance. Officer Harper's perception of obstruction was incorrect. Every action I took was consistent with my duties as Chief Court Administrator. The officer's misunderstanding should not be conflated with non-compliance. Harper's stomach tightened. Every word from Marcus carried weight, not just because of his title, but because they reflected truth, procedure, and controlled authority. Harper realized the irony. The very individual he had attempted to publicly detain now guided the court's understanding of his own actions. The judge nodded. "Officer Harper, your assessment and report will be formally reviewed in light of Mr. Ellison's position and the official documentation of courthouse procedures. This review will determine the appropriateness of your actions." The words hit Harper like a physical weight. Temporary administrative leave, formal review, scrutiny from superiors, all consequences of a single misjudgment magnified by public exposure. He straightened his uniform, but the rigidity was hollow. His arrogance, once an invisible shield behind which he had conducted enforcement with confidence, had collapsed entirely. Marcus returned to his seat, posture relaxed, hands folded neatly, radiating quiet control. There was no vengeance, no triumph, only the quiet authority of knowledge, composure, and procedural correctness. Harper understood then the lesson he had been forced to learn publicly. Power without accuracy, authority without humility, and enforcement without understanding are fragile. And when challenged by someone who embodies both knowledge and calm authority, that facade crumbles instantly. For the first time that day, Harper realized that authority is not a badge or a title. It is earned through competence, procedural clarity, and restraint, and his had been exposed as incomplete. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation as the day wore on. Officer Daniel Harper's earlier confidence had all but dissipated, replaced by an uneasy awareness of the imbalance now dominating the proceedings. Every movement, every word he had uttered, was now scrutinized under a lens he had never experienced in his years on courthouse duty. Marcus Ellison remained calm at the defense table, his composure unshaken by the subtle tension surrounding him. There was no display of triumph, no sharp words or gestures, only the quiet mastery of a man who knew the rules, the law, and the structure of authority down to the smallest detail. Harper had underestimated this calm control earlier, assuming that authority was something one could assert loudly and visibly. He now saw that it was the quiet, precise understanding of procedure that carried true power. The judge leaned forward, her gaze steady, addressing both men. "Mr. Ellison, given your position and the evidence presented, how do you wish the court to interpret the officer's actions in relation to your authority?" Marcus's voice was measured, deliberate, and unhurried. "Your Honor, my intention is not to undermine Officer Harper. My role is to ensure the proper enforcement of courthouse procedures. In this instance, while Officer Harper may have believed his actions were justified, the interpretation of my behavior as obstructive is incorrect. I have followed all procedural guidelines, remained fully compliant, and sought clarification only when appropriate." The words resonated in the courtroom. Observers leaned in, sensing the subtle but undeniable shift in power dynamics. The bailiffs adjusted their stance, clerks exchanged glances, and even the prosecutor appeared more cautious in how they approached the case. Harper's attempts to assert authority were now overshadowed by Marcus's composed presence and factual clarity. Harper opened his mouth to respond, but found that each word felt inadequate. His reports, his carefully constructed statements, and his perception of control now seemed trivial compared to the quiet precision with which Marcus had conducted himself. The realization hit him fully. Control is not maintained by force or assertiveness alone. It is maintained by understanding, calm assessment, and adherence to structure. Marcus continued, addressing the court without haste. Officer Harper acted in accordance with his training, but training does not replace institutional knowledge. Authority is measured by understanding and compliance with procedural frameworks, not merely by the display of power. My actions reflect adherence to policy, not defiance. Therefore, any perception of obstruction should be reconsidered in that context. The judge nodded, noting Marcus's words carefully. The court acknowledges the clarity of Mr. Ellison's statements and the evidence presented. Officer Harper, it is essential that procedural enforcement aligns precisely with internal policies and oversight authority. Harper straightened his posture, though it felt hollow. The badge he wore once seemed sufficient to convey command. Now, it seemed almost ceremonial. Marcus's quiet mastery, had dismantled the illusion of control, leaving Harper to confront a simple truth. Authority is earned through knowledge and composure, not by force or assumption. The courtroom absorbed the moment. Marcus returned to his seat, hands folded neatly, demeanor unshaken. Harper, standing nearby, felt a shift deep within him, a recognition that his understanding of authority had been incomplete. He had faced someone who combined patience, knowledge, and procedural expertise, and the result was undeniable. Quiet mastery had prevailed over assumed power. For Harper, the lesson was clear. True authority is subtle, unwavering, and grounded in competence. And in this courthouse, that authority now belonged to Marcus Ellison. The courtroom had settled into a hushed anticipation, the weight of the day pressing on every participant. Officer Daniel Harper stood near the prosecution table, still in uniform, but the stiffness of his posture betrayed a new awareness. His earlier confidence, built over years of enforcing minor infractions, had given way to an uncomfortable humility. The events of the morning and the courtroom confrontation with Marcus Ellison had permanently altered his understanding of authority and accountability. Marcus remained seated at the defense table, composed as ever. There was no sense of triumph in his demeanor, only calm assurance. Every movement had been deliberate, every word precise, and every response measured. Harper realized that this quiet confidence had been the true force behind the courtroom's shifting dynamics. Authority, he now understood, was less about asserting power and more about embodying competence, adherence to procedure, and the ability to maintain composure under scrutiny. The judge, observing both men carefully, spoke with a measured tone. "Officer Harper, based on today's proceedings and the evidence presented, it is clear that procedural misunderstanding contributed to the detention of Mr. Ellison. The court acknowledges that the actions taken were not malicious but emphasizes the importance of alignment with internal policies and oversight authority." Harper nodded, swallowing the discomfort rising in his chest. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I understand. My actions will be reviewed to ensure compliance with procedural guidelines." Marcus rose calmly, addressing the court. "Your Honor, I have no desire for punitive measures. My aim is clarity, accuracy, and the consistent application of courthouse protocols. I hope this serves as a learning opportunity for all involved and underscores the importance of adhering to both the letter and spirit of policy." The judge acknowledged the statement with a nod. "The court will take this matter into consideration and will ensure procedural alignment moving forward. Mr. Ellison's cooperation is noted, and his conduct demonstrates exemplary adherence to the standards expected of his position." The gallery, previously tense with curiosity, now exhaled collectively. Observers understood the quiet shift that had occurred. The man once publicly detained had revealed authority that surpassed the expectations of everyone present, and the officer, previously confident, had been forced to confront the limitations of perceived power. Harper stepped back slightly, adjusting his uniform. The badge on his chest felt heavier now, not because of its inherent authority, but because he understood that authority alone was insufficient without knowledge, restraint, and respect for procedure. Marcus's quiet mastery had illuminated what enforcement should truly look like: fairness, calm, and awareness of institutional hierarchies. As the judge dismissed the court for the day, Marcus returned to his seat, gathering his notes and jacket. He offered Harper a brief, neutral nod, an acknowledgement, not condescension. Harper met it cautiously, recognizing it as both a challenge and a gesture of respect. He understood now that authority was not defined by immediate compliance or assertive action, but by measured judgment, competence, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. The courtroom emptied gradually. Harper remained momentarily, reflecting on the events. The public arrest, the body cam footage, and the revelation of Marcus Ellison's position had been lessons in humility. For Harper, the day had transformed not only the perception of one man, but also his own understanding of power, responsibility, and the true nature of authority within the halls of justice. Marcus stepped out last, calm and composed, leaving behind a courtroom that had witnessed a profound reversal. Harper watched him go, a quiet resolve forming within him. Authority, he now realized, was never just about the badge. It was about knowledge, integrity, and the disciplined exercise of power. The day ended with clarity, reflection, and a hard-earned respect for Marcus Ellison, for procedure, and for the quiet mastery of true authority.